Hey guys. So I just thought I would jump on here live um, just to chat a little bit about day one of the trial. Um, so first off, I am actually here in Arizona. I wasn't sure. I had got my flight a while back. I wasn't sure if I was actually going to come out. But I did fly out, and so yeah, I'm just gonna cover just a few impressions. For the heavy lifting, you can check out Nate's live blog, and I'm sure he's also live with the actual news. Hey, so a few things. Oh, I guess I should see. Are you able to hear me? Hopefully so, because this is my first time using this laptop and going live. Are you guys able to hear me okay? If so, yes. Okay, great. All right. So there were there were a few surprises. Overall, my impression of the day was one, I guess I was a little surprised by just how unprepared Lori was. I thought she would at least like run her questions by her advisory council. So there were things that she was asking that they were already covered in other hearings that, you can't talk about what anyone said who is now dead. It's considered hearsay. And so, yeah, so, in some ways, she didn't do as badly as I expected she would do. And like, she was more pleasant and things like that. So like as far as her overall attitude, she was much more pleasant than she's been in the hearings. But she just really seemed grossly unprepared um, and really unaware of the law. Like if I were going to represent myself, I would at minimum want to know, like, what are the main things that engender or, like attract objections. And even experienced attorneys, they get a lot of objections. So I'll give her that. But like, things like she just kept slipping into this pattern of testifying instead of asking questions and stuff. The thing I will give her credit for is she seemed to roll with the punches. Like she didn't seem to lose her cool when she experienced objection after objection. So, I think eventually she'll probably get in a little bit more of a flow and maybe she'll be more open to advice from her counsel just to like avoid the embarrassment. Uh, but yeah, another just impression, then I'll get into the actual details. I really, really like how much more relaxed Arizona is than Idaho was. Like with Idaho, if you weren't in when the doors open, like you just weren't allowed into the courtroom until there was an actual break. And the first day there was like a change in like how long we would have for lunch. And it's not like, I went there like, hey, I'm a family member. I expect special treatment or anything like that. But we had just missed the door closing. And so, like, even as a family member, being made to like sit outside the courtroom until the break, I don't know. At the time, I was like, okay, like lesson learned. Like, you just don't leave to get lunch. But here it's just so much more relaxed. And anyway, so just my overall impression. I so far I really like the Arizona court system much more than Idaho. Even in Idaho, like even when there were open seats, like in the afternoon. So the seats tended to be like to fill up in the morning, but then after lunch they would open up, and so I sat with my friends, and so my daughter was with me, and so we were sitting with friends because that's where our support was, and one of the guys came over and was like, "You're going to have to sit in the victims section." Now, I could understand that if there hadn't been open seats, uh, but so I was like, "Well, okay, why?" And he said, "Well, someone complained. Oh, he said someone complained that I was using an outlet." And I said, "Oh, okay, well, no problem. I just won't use an outlet." I mean, the outlets weren't all like taken, but then he said, "Well, no, you're gonna have to sit in the victim section." And that was very weird to me because it was just like, so there were open seats, and clearly in my mind, that was deceptive to tell me that like I couldn't sit with my support system because some mysterious person complained that I was taking up an outlet. Because in the victim section, you had no access to an outlet. But then when I said like, "Oh, okay, no problem, I won't use an outlet," then it's kind of like the truth came out. No, someone decided you have to sit in the victims section, where then one of the other victims like told my daughter and I like that and me that that person needed our seat, and it was just weird. So I when I left Idaho the last time, I was like, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I have no desire to ever return to Idaho. But anyway, so first impressions, really like the courtroom. A couple of things that surprised me. One, Justin Lum wasn't at the courthouse. I guess he was at the studio, and Larry wasn't at the courthouse. So I think those were the only two things I was like a little surprised by absences. But other than that, like, I mean, the day went very smoothly. It was a very well-oiled machine, in my opinion. Okay, so new information. One new piece of information was they mentioned that Alex took pictures of Charles' phone. So Lori had left with Charles' phone after the murder, and Alex took pictures of the text messages between Charles and Adam, and also took a screenshot of like Adam's flight details, which that was a little weird. That was surprising. Another surprising detail. It shouldn't have been as surprising as it was, but uh, Trina, the prosecuting attorney, who did a fantastic job, um, she mentioned that I think she was the one who mentioned someone mentioned that the trajectory of the first shot, and just trigger warning, we're going to get a little graphic here. I'll try to remember to notify when it's no longer graphic, because most of the details, I think this is probably going to be the only graphic detail. But I think it was Trina who mentioned that the trajectory of the first shot to Charles. So that was, center mass. Alex shot him in the chest, and she said that the medical examiner reported that it was front to back. So obviously, Alex was in front of Charles when he shot him, and it was slightly downward. And I knew that about the trajectory, but she said it was less than an inch, which it makes sense. But I'll tell you where. where it doesn't make sense. So initially, it makes sense because Alex was, I think, 6'2" and Charles was 5'11". So they're pretty comparable. And Alex was, shooting just straight on, going for center mass. The thing that was surprising to me was that she posited that, that was the shot that ended up in the floorboard. And I've talked about this in two other lives where I talked about, just how ridiculous the investigation was into Charles' murder. But I was kind of surprised that they led with that because, especially now, given the detail that the trajectory was less than an inch. So you're talking, I mean, it's just basically just straight on, straight through. So then once again, how did that bullet? And I've talked about it. I've talked about this before, but it also hit his spine. So it went through center mass, it went through multiple organs and his spine, and only had less than an inch trajectory. How in the world did it then, like, suddenly, like, go through his body and then go straight down into the baseboard? Now, we don't know how far Charles was from the wall, or any of those details at this point, but I just find that detail incredibly dubious. Like, I just, and the one disappointing thing is that because Lori was so arrogant and insisted on her right to a speedy trial, which is her constitutional right, but it means that, so far they haven't, she hasn't subpoenaed any witnesses, which she complained about that, but the judge clapped back with, this is on you. Like, you can't have it both ways. You can't insist on your right to a speedy trial, but then kind of not kind of accuse the state of somehow interfering with her right to subpoena witnesses, because the state has to also interviewed the witnesses, and there were some witnesses the state said that they weren't able to track down or whatever. And I mean, i'm not I'm not a Pollyanna. I mean, there could be some aspects of that aren't entirely fair, but the judge had a very good point. Like, that's the risk of going forward, insisting on your right to a speedy trial with a case that has so many moving parts, is so complicated, and you're incarcerated. So obviously it was going to be more difficult for her to get a hold of potential witnesses and things like that. But the disadvantage to that is it looks like she will have no one to counter just uh, that testimony. The jury's not going to have any reason to question it. Yeah, so that I was a little surprised that, and I don't mean this like as a criticism of the prosecution. I'm just saying, like, these are the things that were either new information or are kind of surprising. Um, Okay, the death notification. So, someone did a death notification, let Lori know that Charles was dead, and Lori told that officer or detective that she knew he was dead because she was there. So that, then they knew that day that Lori had a very unusually calm and the word of the day today was nonchalant. That was bandied about quite a bit. Lori even asked one detective to define nonchalant, and there were a lot of details like that I was just like, move it along. Like, this is ridiculous. But anyway, so she told them, yeah, she knew he was dead because she was there. And I've talked about this before, that there was a major contradiction between her testimony and no, well, not testimony, her, report in her interview. And Alex is because Alex said that she and the kids were gone when he shot Charles. And Lori put herself in the house in the next room over when Charles was shot, and Tylee put herself outside and said she heard it. So, major, major contradiction there. But okay. Um, Not surprisingly, Lori went through Charles' laptop. Uh, mm, so we know that I've talked about this before. She and Colby went to Houston and gathered up a bunch of Charles' belongings, and included in that was an iMac and a laptop. We don't know what other devices there were. I'm sure there were other devices, but I know from a text message that she sent to to Chad that she had said that she would get Charles' computer on Sunday. So I think at one point I had looked up. I think the 15th was a Monday. Let me look up a July 2019 and calendar really quickly here. Um, yeah, so they were Lori and Colby were there the 15th and the 16th. So Colby said they worked through the night. Well, Lori told Chad that she would check on something when she got the computer on Sunday. So Sunday was the 21st. So she had Alex fly out and pick up the truck, which was in the airport, and she left the keys and money in the truck for Alex to drive the truck back to Arizona with all the belongings. And then we know that Colby got the iMac. We don't know what else he got. But anyway, so um, and so when she went through Charles' laptop, that's when she got the details about the life insurance. And they said that she confronted Kay. So I assumed that was probably the text message that Kay has talked about 5 kids, and his sister gets all the life insurance. That text wasn't in the FOIA docs, so I don't know. That there's no confirmation of that text. I'm sure we will hear more about that. Another new detail for me, at least it's not germane to the case, but they had mentioned that, I think this was also Trina, that JJ was diagnosed with autism when they were in Hawaii. Uh, so I thought that maybe they had known that sooner, but that indicates that they didn't know when they adopted JJ that he was autistic. Um, okay, so a detail that was it must have been Lori um, mentioned, yeah, in her opening statements, that she and Tylee ran outside without shoes. So that was a new detail. I think she was trying to proffer an explanation for why she picked up flip-flops at the Walgreens, but there was no indicator that she was barefoot in that Walgreens. So yeah, so that was kind of a curious detail. The other thing is, it was one thing that was really weird is like for everything she said, she told just about she told the jury, you will see evidence that, and it was just like inane details about their lives, so you could tell she just didn't know what it was. It was almost like. I don't know, monkey see, monkey do. Again, anyone who's followed my channel knows that I do not think that Lori is intelligent. I think she's going to do the best that she can, but her yeah, it wasn't even just a lack of training, it was a lack of intelligence that was on display today. Just like, have you ever even watched a court show? Like a court, like any kind of movie or show that involved, lawyers in a courtroom? Like, you don't have to say for every detail, like, that the evidence will show that you know, Charles and I got married and whatever, and we were, married for how 17 years or whatever it was. It was that was just it was just kind of weird. Um, okay. Uh, okay, someone just texted me. I wanted to make sure I didn't lose sound or something. Um, okay. Oh, yeah. So one thing that was curious to me is, so we found out a couple of the officers whose body cam we had seen. So the officer who like first went into the home and was like, yelling out, hello, Chandler Police Department, if anyone's here, make yourself known, yada yada. His name was Erwin where's Bicky? And and he was also the one who yeah, he was the one who was like frustrated because they couldn't find a wallet or any ID for Charles. And then the other officer whose body cam we saw, the one who was he had uh briefly talked with Lori and Tylee outside. His name was Robert, I think it was Krautheim, something like that. Anyway, so Lori asked both of them. Oh, and and Officer Krautheim, he kept referring to Officer Wierzbicki as the Wiz. And so then Lori called him the Wiz, or I think he called him like Officer Wiz or something like that. Anyway, so Lori asked both of them if they had changed anything in their reports since July 11th. And so that was, like I was like, okay, I'm just going to kind of tuck that away. Like, does she have evidence that they had changed anything or modified their report in any way? They both said no, so we'll see what happens with that. Another thing I was surprised, again, this is by no means a criticism on some level. I can understand that the prosecutor is dealing with a less than perfect case because it was a less than perfect investigation, and that is putting it mildly. But they, um, no one mentioned the fact that, so according to, let me back up a little bit. So according to Tylee and Lori's statements, uh, and maybe even Alex, uh, Tylee extended the bat. Now, do I believe Tylee ever touched the bat? No, no. I think the bat was planted afterwards. I think Charles walked in and was gunned down. Having said all of that, uh, um, their statement was that when Tylee held the bat out, that Charles grabbed the bat by the fat part of the bat, which is called the barrel. And so if he had grabbed that bat, there would have been five clear fingerprints. At least one of those fingerprints or some kind of DNA would have been on that bat. And they didn't even send the bat to be tested. until September. I believe by the time they sent the bat to be tested, to like send it to the lab, I believe Tylee was already dead. And so they weren't breaking any speed records in this investigation. But they just said like the the testing of the bat, like it was inconclusive. And I call BS on that. I just think like that's a way of just kind of cushioning themselves because I think if they had said, yeah, you know what? Charles Vallow's fingerprints weren't on the bat, they would have gotten probably a lot more clapback. But I was very curious about the bat, and obviously, like in that kind of situation, if their statements were true, his adrenaline would have been sky high. There most likely would have been an increase in perspiration. They even talked today about how it was a hot day, and I mean, obviously it's July in Arizona. It was going to be a hot day. It was, but but his fingerprints or DNA should have been on that bag, and um, and I don't think it was just inconclusive. I think they were nowhere on the bat because I don't think he ever touched that bat. And they weren't even clever enough to be like, oh, okay, well, we're going with this bat story. So let's at least press his hand against the bat. Lord knows they had 40 some minutes to clean up the entire scene. So they would have had time to do that, but they weren't clever. They're not intelligent people. But Lori played, what what was her main asset, which was the charm. And speaking of which, another surprising detail to me was that Lori and Tylee met with a victim's advocate that day, like before they left the police station. I just thought like Detective Inklin, or however you pronounce her name, uh, like just gave her the like a business card for one, because she did when she talked to Lori, but no, they actually met with one. So I look forward to learning more about that, because did they have Lori and Tylee meet with a victim's advocate together? Uh, anyway, and that had to also be, just more confirmation to Tylee, and there was no safe avenue for her to tell anyone what she knew. Everyone kowtowed to Lori. Everyone was charmed by her, and they're not now. She did try to pull her charm a little bit today, and like even tried to like kind of giggle with one of the officers while he was on the stand, but it just kind of fell flat. Uh, okay, so another detail is there was a weird obsession with where Lori parked. Like there was a lot of discussion about she parked in front of the house across the street, and she was like, "Oh, I wouldn't have been able to park anywhere else." And then the one, officer was saying, well, no, you could have parked, like one street over, you could have parked around the corner. So I have no idea where anyone was going with that. Like, who cares? Like in the grand scheme of things, like I just don't think that that moved anything forward. And so, if I, having followed this case as closely as I have, was sitting there like, what is the point? I am sure the jury had to be like, like, like either make us care or leave these details out. So yeah. Okay, so that was kind of weird. A highlight for me was I got to talk to the the reporter. I should have looked up her last name. I posted the interview that she did with Lori. I know her first name is Brianna, but I had an opportunity to talk with her and tell her just, you know, not that it matters, but just how impressed I was with her handling of the interview. And I would go so far as to say, I think she handled Lori the most expertly of anyone I've seen to date, honestly. Like she kept her in check. She was so professional. She maintained just like a sobriety, which I think just helped maintain like just the gravitas of the moment. And anyway, so it was nice seeing her. Um, and yeah, those were my impressions. Um, uh, Okay. And if anyone has any questions, I'll take some questions. But again, um, I just thought, mm, for whatever's worth, I would jump on and talk about my impressions. I don't know. I didn't even look to see if anyone was tracking questions. I'll assume not, because I didn't even give my mods advance notice because I wasn't even sure like when I was going to get back to where I was staying and stuff. And then I was kind of torn between going for a run and going live. So if you do have a question, if you dropped it in earlier, just assume that I'm not going to see it and ask it again, with like question in all caps or a question mark emoji or whatever. But yes, Lori, I am at the trial. I have a conference back in New York later this month. So if it lasts the full 6 weeks, I won't be here for the full 6 weeks. But I mean, who knows? I mean, it might just last 6 weeks because of all of the just dead time of, um, you know, the judge having to explain the law to Lori. Oh, there was one other thing. I wasn't sure if I was even going to touch on this because I don't want to get emotional, but in the other like in the body cam videos that we've seen publicly, um, you know, y- uh, they had Tylee's face redacted. Not totally. I don't know. Um, whatever, that doesn't matter so much. But one thing they did that was a little unusual is Trina was questioning one of the officers, but had the body cam like footage playing, but there was no sound except when they wanted to show Lori just being so flippant, like she had just moved to the neighborhood 3 weeks before, so she is like, "Sorry, neighbors." They played that, but other than that, it was just playing on the screens, but there was no sound. But it was just kind of eerie, just to see like Tylee, um, on a large screen and just seeing just how vulnerable she looked. And I've talked about this in other lives, but I studied that body cam footage quite a bit early on. And normally in a situation like this where there's a lot of trauma, a lot of chaos, a lot of confusion, uh, you see the kids kind of hide behind the parents, like maybe not like completely hidden, but like they want to be close to the parent, and and just kind of like, guarded. And uh and uh, and Tylee stood pretty far away from her mom, and it was obvious that, to me, that she had no advanced warning that any of this was happening, because it appears she didn't even have time to like grab a bra. So, she kept like crossing her arms, and yeah, she just looked, especially now, like knowing, all that I know about the story, and just how much she was one against the wind without a single advocate that who, would go to the mat for her. It was just sad. It was really sad, just to, I guess it was just seeing it, like seeing her larger than life, and just on like multiple screens and stuff. But anyway, yeah, so I forget where I was going with that, but yes, I'm here in Arizona. Oh yeah, I was going to look to see when my flight leaves. I don't remember. It's like the last week in April. Um, okay. Uh, yeah. It was kind of, Victoria asked, what about the fact that Charles was left-handed and the bat was in his right hand? The bat wasn't in his right hand. It was lying to the right of him. So, and he was a southpaw. I've talked about that before. He was left-handed, but I played softball 9 years, and so in the world of baseball, being left-handed, you're called a southpaw. But she made the point that even though he was left-handed, he batted uh, right-handed. I don't know. I never saw him play baseball. I would find that highly unusual, because I've pitched for, I think, 7 of the 9 years I played, and as a righty, it's harder to pitch to a left-handed player, and so that's a competitive advantage to be a left-handed batter. And then also, lefties tend to bat to right field, which is where you typically put your weakest player. So yeah, I don't know why a lefty would give up all of those advantages. But you know, regardless, if you go back to Lori's interview with Detective Inclin, um, when she was talking about Charles swinging the bat at Alex, it was so outside the realm of possibility, because she told the detective that he was holding the bat like this. And the one thing I will give Detective Inclin was, she started to like ask a leading question, like, like kind of like, are you sure? Because no baseball player, well, I wasn't ever even a pro softball player. I mean, you have muscle memory. There's no way someone with a baseball bat, ostensibly fighting for his life, would use it like it was a badminton racket, or pickleball. Like, you don't bat with holding a bat with one hand, which is how she described it. She like held up her arm and had the bat like this, and specifically said it was like, he went like that. And that is just insane. Like, again, it speaks to her lack of intelligence and her lack of any kind of awareness of how baseball works. So, yeah, and she also had him holding the bat with his right hand. But yeah, so, and even like, again, as a former softball player, and nothing on the league that Charles was on. But you learn that your strength with the bat doesn't come from your arms. It comes from your body. It's like golf, like you pivot, and you are using your core to, help to get as much momentum as you can with the bat. So that when it connects with the ball, it's going to go further, and she just had no concept of any of that. So, but again, it was kind of weird that they were quibbling over, if he was left-handed or right-handed and the placement of the bat, when to me the much bigger deal was his prints weren't on the bat. Like who even cares where the bat was? His prints weren't on it. So clearly their statement is completely invalidated. So, okay. Uh, yeah, and the whole detail. Oh, the whole detail about her taking Charles' phone. Again, I think that this was a little bit of a missed opportunity, uh, in that when they talked about how Lori had Charles' phone when they drove back. Um, and let me say, first of all, before I forget, I talked about this in the live where I talked about the what we learned from the GPS data in the FOIA docs. So I had retraced Lori, Alex, and Tylee's steps just by looking up these different like GPS coordinates and sometimes they gave cross streets and the times that they were at these different cross streets. Well, when they called uh, Alex and Lori and asked them to come back to the house, before they went back to the house, so the three of them, Alex, Lori, and Tylee, were at Alex's house. That's where they, after, getting back from the police station and while JJ was at school, they were at Alex's house, and then they got the call when they were at Alex's house. Well, before they went back to the murder house, they stopped at this office complex that was kind of newer, and I don't know if we know how long they were at that office complex. I think I was able to deduce, but just by like the next location that they were identified, or that I was able to drop a pin at. Uh, but so I was like, why are they at this medical complex? My first thought was they're dumpsters. They dumped stuff from Alex's house in these dumpsters. And then after doing that live, someone left a comment that Summer's husband's office is in that medical complex. So it stands to reason that they would have been familiar with that medical complex. But anyway, there was no mention of that, like, and I guess that might make sense, like maybe, maybe because they didn't investigate, like no one actually, went to these different places that we're aware of in any kind of timely manner. But anyway, so, oh, there was one other thing that annoyed me. The officer who shooed away the neighbor, um, I think that was, I think it was the one who interviewed Lori and Tylee. I think he was the one who testified second. Don't hold me to that. But he actually said something about, like, they had to secure the scene and something about, because people, like, they want to come by just to see, like, what check out what was going on. Well, someone came to the scene, like it looked like a neighbor, and he just shooed him away, didn't ask him, like they didn't have another officer or a detective, question him. They didn't canvass the neighborhood. There's no, I should say, there's no evidence anywhere in the police report that they ever canvassed the neighborhood. There was after Brandon's attempted murder, they canvassed the neighborhood pretty extensively, but then they were like super soft on Melanie. But in Chandler, I mean, I looked up ring camera. They didn't like go, there's no evidence that they asked any of the neighbors, do you have ring camera footage or, and didn't ask and didn't interview any of the neighbors. But it it bothered me that it seemed like having known that he shooed that guy away, it bothered me that it seemed like he was trying to get in front of that by like, oh, we have to secure the scene, because people just want to come by and see what's going on. And that may be true. I'm sure neighbors get really curious when the police are involved, but yeah. I think that was a major oversight that, I mean, there were so many oversights, but okay. Um, let's see if there are any other questions. Let me see if uh, my mod sent a picture, but I don't know what it's like sent a screenshot, but it's too much to see if there's an actual question. Okay, Beverly, silly question, but what was that random fax machine sound that blasted over the courtroom speakers during the second officer's testimony? Yeah, the judge mentioned something to one of the jurors about like he had to be careful with his phone because it can like cause interference. So I was surprised that jurors were allowed to have phones. I didn't think that jurors would be allowed to have a phone with them. But so I think that was the cause, but it was either that or Chad was trying to break through the portal. It was weird. Uh, okay, Granny Whisper asked, "Did you notice how nervous the police officer was?" Uh, I don't know which police officer. Um, neither one of them struck me as particularly nervous. The second one, for me, just full disclosure, it is difficult to listen to these officers just knowing how lame their investigation was. So I was bothered by the second officer. Um, like I just felt like he was playing to the crowd with, some kind of ridiculous things he was saying. Um, and I think like in trying to make Lori look stupid, I think he he made himself look unprofessional when I already wasn't like, I'm not overly impressed with Chandler Police. But anyway, um, okay, you know what? Yeah, I'm just going to, like, if you leave a stupid question, like, could you stop playing with your hair? Could you not do this? Whatever. I'm just gonna ban you. Like, take your Karen ass out of here. Like, I'm just in no mood for that tonight. But okay. Did you see fighting between Tylee and Charles? All I've heard about is Lori and Tylee's rocky relationship. No, I didn't see them interact much at all. Um, so yeah, but I've talked before about um I imagine, like, it's not hard to imagine that there would be friction between Charles and Tylee. They both had very strong personalities. So I can imagine them being like colliding storm fronts. But yeah, I didn't see anything. But also keep in mind, I was there for such a short period of time. I think it was like 4 or 5 days. It's not like I was going to really see a day in the life. I did see a lot of, like pretty, um, standard interactions among family members. But for the most part, Charles kind of stayed in his office. Like he worked from home, but he was in his office, and like we chatted, like we chatted business, and like I helped him with an Excel issue and an issue with his Mac. But yeah, I don't find that difficult to believe that there was friction. Uh, Lori mentioned that they had a fight in March and that it was recorded. And I did think back to when Summer was interviewed by, I think it was Gilbert Police. She said that Charles had come by Alex's and she was there, and they were standing outside, and Tylee and Charles went at it, and she said she recorded the fight. So, um, but I can imagine that Tylee had resentment toward both Charles and Lori for just squandering the life insurance from Joe. So we know from Adam that Tylee only got $2,000 of the, I believe they got 63,000. And a confidential source, a very reliable confidential source, had told me that and this person had helped to get the insurance payout, and this person worked in insurance and had told me it was very unusual for a, a life insurance company to take so long to pay out. So Joe was found in, mm, uh, is it April? Yeah, he was found April 3rd, our dad's birthday. Um, and um, and oh, I've lost my train of thought. Hey there, I just went live. Yeah. Uh, uh, yeah, yeah, I have been. Um, anyway, so yeah, so this person had said that when they got the insurance money, that like Charles just wasn't motivated to work. And I remember also when I was in the first Facebook group, it was Real Massacre Talk, and like a bunch of family members were in that group. And I remember early on someone coming into that group and um, uh, saying that they had gone over to Lori and Charles' house like a number of times. And one thing that was weird was no one was working. It was the middle of the day and everyone was like just sitting around watching TV. Now, at this point, like, who knows who that was? But yeah, so. Uh, and I've talked about this before, but when I was there in 2018, I had told Lori, I was like, I know you and Joe had your issues, but I'm sure he had life insurance for Tylee. So you may want to look into a policy. And she was like, we don't need his money. I mean, she wasn't like being rude to me. She was just being that like when she goes kind of manic, but like it's like it comes across like it's like positive and sunshiny, but it's also, it's just like weirdly aggressive. But she was like, I don't care if he had a life insurance policy. We don't need his money. Go because I had said, like, like that's money that Tylee could use for college or to buy a car or something. And she was like, we don't need anything from him. Like we will send Tylee to college and we'll buy Tylee's car. And so I was like, okay, well. But even at the time, I was like, and I this was toward the end of the trip, and I was already very over Lori. But I just wanted to tell her, like, Lori, that's not your call to make. Like, that's not your money. That's Tylee's money. If he had a life insurance policy, he like she could buy herself something significant, but anyway, so even for me to find out, having heard her from her own mouth say, we don't need anything, we can buy Tylee's car and pay for Tylee's college, and then to find out like they just tore through this money and they didn't buy Tylee a car. And then I thought from the Idaho trial, I thought that that Tylee was paying 400 a month for a car payment, just because there was so much information. And when I was going back through, when I built this app, um, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Um, uh, and could actually like look up different things. I was very surprised to find out, oh no, it was $600 a month. So I imagine that Tylee had quite a bit of resentment toward both of them, especially if she knew that her dad was killed, and I suspect that she did. Not just, you know, um, just with all of the details from like the pictures from the welfare check um, and seeing it was very clear to me he was packing for a trip and he was packing girls things. And Tylee told me she hadn't seen her dad for a year. Lori said they hadn't even heard from him for 2 years. She said that in that was in the police report. So yeah, I do think that Tylee was most likely used as a lure. That's how they got to Joe. But anyway, but if Tylee knew that her dad was killed and then saw them, just kind of blowing through this money, I imagine there was quite a bit of resentment. But also, you have to keep in mind with Tylee, she didn't have the luxury of taking Charles' side. Like, she had to know, like, she grew up knowing having any kind of allegiance toward her dad was uh, put her potentially in a perilous position. So now Charles was Joe Ryan 2.0. So, I've said this before. Tylee's only job was to stay alive. She couldn't do anything safely to protect Charles and or even to tell the police what actually happened that day. Because if Tylee was afraid that she was next, she was right. And if she thought that putting herself out there, that she ran the risk of no one being there for her to protect her, to you know, um, yeah, just protect her or go to bat for her. She was also right because, we now know so many people had that ratings document, and there is no evidence that one single person ever so much as sent that document to law enforcement. So anyway, okay. Was Lori tested for gunshot residue? No, none of them were. Um, no, thank you, Ashes Tashes. Uh, Yeah, uh, um, yeah, I didn't not say anything to like be mysterious or anything like that. I mean, it should come as no surprise and be no secret that I'm not exactly making friends and winning and influencing people with some of my reporting. So I don't really want to give some people a heads up, like, oh, just so you can like, plan an offensive. I just would rather not announce anything I'm doing. But then also, I really just wasn't sure because I was trying to get another app, like a machine learning app, out on my site. And I thought I would have enough time to finish that and the app for the case that I'm building before I left. And I ended up just getting the other app out the day before getting on the flight. And that was like after a week of working around the clock on it. No, so I had pretty much told myself if I don't finish that before my flight, I'm just gonna like put off the flight, maybe come like for the last part, but uh okay. Um yeah, Pam said after watching all the information we have about Lori from these trials, I am more convinced she murdered your brother Joe. Remember that video that floated around saying she was going to kill him? Yeah, that was at wasn't a video, it was an audio recording at Melanie Gibbs' house. But yeah, um okay. Uh yeah, so someone asked, how are you feeling about her starting out by opening uh, out her opening by essentially blaming Tylee for her separation from Charles? I really had to brace myself for just how much she was going to use Tylee as a scapegoat. Um, I am grateful that Trina is all over her, like with objections and not allowing her to testify. So we don't know if she's going to testify in her own defense. Uh, if she does, um, I imagine that will be her opportunity to try to chuck Tylee under the bus. But you know, um, I don't know. Yeah, I feel a little discombobulated as I after this first day. I don't really know what I was expecting. I think I'm still just kind of reeling from seeing Tylee. Like, it was footage that I've seen before. So I think, when I was in the courtroom, I was like, just don't react. I don't like to draw attention to myself. But yeah, I think, I just kind of had to, sorry, I just, I really had to brace myself for, just coming out here and knowing just, uh, her schemes. But, and normally I don't go live or talk when I'm in this, kind of somewhat unsettled state. So if I seem like more reactive or whatever, I'm not excusing it. It's just, like it's probably going to be a little more raw, some of these lives, um, but that was a calculated risk. But yeah, so for me, like with my beliefs, the beliefs that tether me, I really try very hard to like just not allow myself to succumb to hatred. But when you're in the moment, it is. I knew coming out here, I knew it would be harder to deal with with some of those feelings, and even seeing some of these police officers, who, in my opinion, did such an abysmal job. Like I said, like, watching the one just kind of like, try to play to the crowd. At least that's how it came across. It just really bothered me. Um, but yeah, I know that, I'm going to have to fight through a lot more of those feelings, but ultimately I know that I will find north on my compass. And one thing that was helpful today was, I don't like to just sit and watch something, or listen to something. So I had my laptop, and it was nice not having to like sit in a victims section where I would just be victimized. But is that? Oh, thank you so much. Um, I'm being so spoiled here. So spoiled. Uh, Gidget, do you want to go? Do you want to say hi? I'm not putting you on the spot, but yeah. So I'm staying with Gidget. She's one of my moderators, and she has spoiled me silly. But thank you. She brought me a fresca. Um, but uh, but yeah. So I knew the risks, coming out here, and uh, yeah, I forget now where I was even going with that. Oh, but yeah. So I'm just going to have to brace myself for her. I don't know. It's not a situation like Idaho where there were other stressors that I don't have here. Like, I'm just so grateful to like actually be in an environment where I have my own support system. Um, and don't have to feel like the redheaded stepchild of the case. And so it was just amazing just being able to like sit with my friends, um and people who have followed this case and carried these victims in their hearts, and have been up through the night, like digging into evidence with me and looking at photos from the welfare check from when Joe was found, and all of the amazing ways that they haven't just supported me, because this isn't just about me. It's like they've supported these victims, and they've supported my efforts of really trying to get to the truth, in this story. So I think, you know unlike Idaho, the positive part about Idaho, besides the people, like the general public and stuff, they were absolutely just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. But their law enforcement, they were so sincere in their efforts, and they were the ones who brought this clown car to a screeching halt, and worked so sincerely to get justice for these victims. In this particular trial, it is going to be hard, because it's like I'm going to have to deal with these feelings of anger, and at times, possibly rage. I didn't feel rage today. I felt more just like overall irritation with different details, but it was more like from both sides, irritated with Lori, but then also irritated with some of these witnesses so far. But anyway, I don't know. It's uh, but one thing that helped me was, the entire time I was just programming the app. So I was listening, and I would look up, from time to time. But even when I couldn't bear to like look at Tylee anymore, I would just, be back on my laptop building the app that I'm getting very, very close to being able to make that public. I'm hoping that I'll be able to make this app public, even not just during this trial, but hopefully even early in the trial, because the advantage to the app. So, uh, initially I built this app for myself, and it was just so I could search across the different trials, and that's how I was able to find some new details, because I would just search for something, and I had pulled the content from East Idaho News, the trial content, because Nate is, just such a super reporter in his live blogging. It's the closest I can get to transcripts. Like the transcripts, it would, to get transcripts of these trials, it would be north of $10,000. And anyway, and so that's just kind of outside the realm of possibility right now. But the next best thing is his live blog coverage, because he hits on so many details. So I built an app that basically like scraped the East Idaho News site, and there was a piece of JavaScript that identified articles as Daybell case. And so I was able to, with this algorithm, say, okay, chew the meat, spit out the bones. Anything that's not tagged Daybell case, don't store it in this database. But anything that's tagged Daybell case, store in this database. And then because in the page title, or the article title, he always includes live updates in all caps. I was able to use that to identify specifically trial coverage. So in the app, when and I did ask East Idaho News for permission to include the articles in the app, because the advantage to including the articles is it highlights the keywords that you search for. And I'm even using AI to give users the ability to expand, like to include synonyms for a particular keyword. And I'm creating a custom dictionary to create to tether different keywords together. So for example, if you search the app for zombie, I've set it up so that it will also return matches for evil spirit, dark spirit, uh, um, Ned, Iblos, Garrett, which also pulls in Garrett Smith, which is kind of funny. But and Rhonda and Elroy, and I forget. Rhonda was Kay's dark spirit, and I forget. Oh, no. Yeah, I forget Tammy's. Um, Viola. And but anyway, so if you do a search for zombie, it will also highlight all of these, like, dark spirit names, as well as, dark spirit, evil spirit, and stuff. So it's going to be pretty cool. But you really get a lot of insight by like hearing the details and then just being able to search. Okay, I want to search for life insurance across the different trials. Anyway, um, yeah, so it was kind of nice to like that was a good way to kind of keep myself calibrated, because when it's like you start to feel like I just want to punch her in the face, it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to put all of that energy into coding. Yeah, uh, someone mentioned Tylee humming that song from Moana. I'm sorry, I'm usually Ugh, um anyway, yeah, that was really sad, especially when you look at the lyrics for that song. Um, okay. All right. Let me see if there are any other questions. Sunny asked, how is Lori getting text messages in jail? She said She only heard about people's opinions about her in text in that last interview. Well, she has like some kind of tablet, and I don't know. Um, I mean, it's all monitored, but she may be able to message with family members as well as be able to do video calls and voice calls. So I assume that's what she's talking about. Um, okay. All right. Okay. Lee Shell Thompson asked, oh, sorry, I need to pick up a puppy here. I've gotten really close to these two dogs. Um, Are we sure there were only two spent rounds from the gun? Could he have fired three times, only striking Charles twice, and the third going wide and into the basement? So, yeah, I strongly suspect that. Cinda's dog's so cute. I strongly suspect that that round that was in the baseboard never hit Charles. And we have body cam footage of one officer. He was kind of rounding the corner and said there were one, two, three, four shots, something like that. Like he said something like that, not me. And so, I will be curious to see if anyone talks about how many casings were actually recovered at the scene. Mm, But I will also be curious. So we did see a picture of multiple people working on Charles, and one of them was the fire captain. And he caught my attention when I was looking for something in the FOIA docs because I believe he was the one who had noted that the round or bullet that was just chilling in the middle of the floor, like probably maybe 3 feet from Charles' shoulder, did not look like it had been spent. In other words, it did not look like it had left a gun. And I did a live, like the second live, the first one that I did from A Murderous Heart about Charles, I included, like I did kind of a Google slide presentation and showed the what a spent bullet looks like from the gun that Alex used. It was a very high powered, I think it was a pistol. But um, anyway, and after it's spent, it looks floured, like the round or the bullet, I mean, it's like destroyed. But this round that was chilling in the middle of the floor, that had like, it looked like it had been dipped in some blood and maybe hit with a hammer or something. It definitely didn't look spent. So I've been saying that ever since I got pictures from the police report. And I zoomed way in because these were high resolution images. So meaning like imagine like y- you have a lot of pixels shoehorned into these images, which means you can blow them up pretty large before they become pixelated. So I blew them up as much as I could with, I was on a large screen, and it doesn't look like a spent round. It looks like someone dipped it in blood and just put it in the middle of the floor. Plus, I talked about this in that live, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but it was totally in the wrong location because the trajectory of that shot, again, trigger warning, this is going to get a lot graphic, I'm sorry. But the second shot, Charles was already down, and that's why they called it a sword wound. It's because it like ran along the floor and created an etched path in the floorboard. But it entered in his abdomen and exited out his shoulder. So it should have it should have been like in this direction, and it wasn't. It was like like just due west of his shoulder, as if it went through his abdomen, up his midsection, exited his shoulder, and then just hung a sharp right. It makes no sense. And I think, I think Chandler Police is going to have a very difficult time doing any kind of trajectory analysis that justifies them falling for that being any kind of a believable crime scene, because there is no blood anywhere, except that the only blood to be found anywhere on that entire floor, the walls, the windows, was that little bit of blood that was on the round. So, so no, to answer your question, I suspect that there were at least three shots. That one missed him, one hit him, but they collected that round, and we do know that there was an exit wound, but and then yeah, and I don't think that the round that was in the middle of the floor was the one that um went through the floor. It's anyway. Uh, oh, Donnie asked, did they mention she hosted a pool party on that day? No. And this is where I think it's going to be, like the prosecutor was handed a difficult case because they can't cover a lot of those details without, unintentionally indicting some of their witnesses and the victims. But yeah. Someone asked, do you think Lori will testify? How else will she prove her evidence? I don't know. I really don't know. I'm of two minds with that. I'm sure her advisors have told her not to do it. Um, but I'm sure her attorneys in Idaho told her not to say batshit crazy things that she said. And yeah. And Judge Boyce, who I just, I came to just really, really admire. He has this kind of funny thing that he does, not funny, haha, but we all have our little characteristics, but or idiosyncrasies. But when he is taken aback by something, he is literally taken aback. So when something happens, because he, for the most part, he has a stellar poker face. But when he's really taken aback by something, he literally, like, he kind of pulls his neck back, and you see his face become steely. And but then he catches himself, and he, like, returns to neutral. But yeah, so you could see he was really taken aback before, kind of recalibrating. But he definitely seemed to be indicating, like, WTF, mate, like, where is this coming from? So if she does testify, it'll be crazy. It'll just be crazy. Um Oh, Kondo asked, did you see any visible reaction by the jury? Honestly, I was so focused on, like, looking down at my laptop. I was working. I didn't really pay much attention to the jury. Other people, like, just talking with friends afterwards. Uh, some people describe them as just at times almost kind of checked out, like, they really get in the weeds, and I'm sure at times they have to be like, what do I do with this? Like, what is the relevance of these details? So I think sometimes it's like, okay, if you're gonna build up to something, like, deliver that something pretty soon. But yeah, I don't really know. Um Okay. Um, Let me go to more recent because I'm seeing a lot of the comments that I had already seen. Um, mm, uh, yeah. Purple Coconut said, I think the judge was having a migraine at some point. So speaking of people's idiosyncrasies, like we all have different things that we do when we're, stressed or just, trying to manage, like, yeah, just stress. I'm a hand wringer. So like that's kind of how I self-soothe or, recalibrate. But the judge, he is like a forehead rubber. Like there were just different times, especially early on before they brought the jury in, when they were deliberating over if Brandon was going to be able to stay in the courtroom. I loved how the judge wouldn't let Lori approach the bench. So, she just had headphones on, and they're talking ad infinitum, and at different times, his hand is like his head is just in his hand, and he's just like rubbing his forehead, and you could tell he was just like, what the actual but so I did notice like in previous hearings he and I've even commented like this judge has the patience of Job. I think we saw him like really kind of run out of patience today, and understandably so, because like he just had to explain to her, even though this had already, there had been, I think, an entire hearing dedicated to this, if I remember correctly. I haven't been really following the hearings, but when someone dies, you can't bring their statements in because it's considered hearsay because the person can't testify. And she just didn't seem to, I don't know if she thought like she would wear him down or like get in little zingers, but yeah, he seemed really just kind of over it. So this might be a really long 6 weeks. I don't think it'll take 6 weeks, but it's going to be a long trial for him. Um, yeah, Lori said, I think this judge seems very fair and strong. I agree. I am so grateful. I mean, especially given, some of the incompetence in this case, like just with how so much of law enforcement, even the FBI, they just all got swept up by one person's hysteria and um and viewed Tylee as as one of the perps, even though like they had her phone records in October. Like you can't tell me that no one and Chandler police pulled Tylee's phone records along with Lori, Alex, and Melanie then Boudreaux. You can't tell me no one. Oh, I'm sorry. So Chandler pulled it. Then they handed these phone records off to the FBI because they needed help in processing this. And then the FBI did the analysis. And I'm like, seriously? Was there not one person who questioned, huh, we have a 16-year-old whose whose phone data would have dropped off precipitously. But anyway, but I am, given some of these details that cause quite a bit of stress with this case, I am so grateful that we have had two judges who are just so calm and measured and yeah, so I mean we've had other judges, but it's primarily been Judge Boyce and now this judge. And so I really like the way he handles his courtroom. I appreciate how he has treated Lori with fairness. He has been patient with her because for me, my big thing is I just don't want there to be grounds for appeal. Like there are going to be appeals, but some of these things that I think are done as like kind of crowd pleasers is like, yeah, well, enjoy that now, but these are things that are potentially grounds for appeals, So I really appreciate just how extra careful both of these judges have been. And I've said before, like when Judge Boyce took the death penalty off the table for Lori and people were like losing their minds over that. Yeah, I said like there is nothing a judge can do more to protect victims than to protect a defendant's right to a fair trial, their constitutional right to a fair trial. And I know, like, you know, some family members have accused me of being like super liberal. I have never made any public statements about like my political leanings other than to say I'm independent and as a bit of a Rayman, I do not understand obsessions with a political party on either side. I think people get, really kind of crazy. So it's not a liberal mindset, because I live in New York. I just don't want, I know that appeals, especially for Chad, because it's a capital case, he's automatically granted an appeal. But I don't want to have to deal with appeals because of a stupid mistake, especially if it's something that, seems to be done as like some kind of crowd pleasing, thing. But anyway, so yeah, I haven't really watched Judge Boreski very much because I don't really follow like a lot of the hearings leading up to the trials. Um, I really try to save my energy and the little bit of time I have for the trials and the influx of actual information. But what I've seen of him, I really, really like. Um, okay. Uh, hmm, thank you, Razor's Edge. That was very kind. Um, uh, yeah, someone mentioned. They also allowed Alex to wash his hands in the kitchen sink. That's not true. He had reported to them that he washed his hands. Alex made it sound like he shot Charles and then, he just cleaned up a little bit and called 911. I mean, he didn't call 911 for a long time. Think 40 some minutes. And I think that's when he was doing the cleanup. Um, but he washed his hands. Well, one thing I've talked about this before, but they found blood on I think it's an aerator by the kitchen sink. And the police report noted that they took a picture of it but didn't collect it for testing. So I'm like, what's the point of taking a picture? Like you don't even know whose blood it was, but anyway, that's kind of par for the case. Um, okay, yeah, Lynette, Burns, I guess, said maybe it's late and I'm just feeling snarky, but is anyone else getting the popcorn and margaritas ready for the Christina Atwood and Serena Sharp testimony showdowns? I'm glad you brought up Christina Atwood. That was actually another thing that surprised me that Trina, the prosecutor, mentioned because I talked about this in. I think a live or I shared the video. It was like a snippet from Christina Atwood's interview with then Lieutenant Ball, now he's Sheriff Ball. But she had talked about how like Lori had said she was poisoning Charles, which already like how do you not have like so many red flags that you go to law enforcement with that? But anyway, but she is poisoning Charles, which another friend had like had kind of played down as, oh no, she wasn't poisoning him. She was putting Xanax in his smoothie to like chill him out. Well, anyone who's taken Xanax knows it's very bitter. So, so yeah, I don't think she was putting Xanax in his smoothie. I think they all knew she was trying to poison him. Um, but Christina said in this interview that she told Lori, right? So that was quite the flex. Yeah, I mean, like basically, if anything happens to Charles, I'm going to the police. And I wanted to be like, do you hear yourself? You're saying this in an interview, what, a year, 2 years later, year and a half later? You didn't go to police. Like, you supposedly said that right before he was shot. Then he was shot and killed. And I think she said she even talked with Lori one time after that. I'm not sure. I would have to check the timeline. But she definitely said that she would have to go to police if anything happened to him. But then she didn't. But Trina actually mentioned that, like, that, she was so concerned. She told Lori if anything happened to Charles, she would have to go to police. And I believe, apart from Ann Eliason, who is Lori, one of Lori's friends in Hawaii, the one who had heard from Angelina Law and April Raymond that Lori bragged that she had paid Alex to kill Joe. Um, she's the only one who I know of who actually went to police. Like everyone else had to be tracked down. So, so I thought that was unusual that she would mention that just because like it just kind of opens Christina up for, questioning and more scrutiny. Like, so then why didn't you? You know? But anyway, but also Christina had said something about like she definitely knew, and Serena Sharp also talked about this, about they both knew that Tylee had been rated dark. I mean, to be clear, they all knew Tylee had been rated dark. But Christina, I believe, had said that she thought that maybe Tylee was one of the ones that they prayed for and did the casting for in August when the whole group was together in the house where a man had just been murdered, like 2.5 weeks prior. One thing I think is interesting is that the state isn't calling Melanie Gibb, Melanie Boudreau, or Zulema. Uh, and Melanie Gibb was with Lori just less than 48 hours, probably less than 36 hours before Charles was murdered. Like she spent the night. Um, so yeah, but they aren't calling any of them as witnesses. And so I just wonder if they're like, well, you know what? If they're all so dubious and the public hates them, they probably won't help our case any. So yeah, so I think they just kind of called the friends who they're like, well, the public doesn't really hate these women, so mm, they'll be safer. Yeah, I wish Dexter Morgan from Dexter was analyzing the blood spatter too. My daughter was just on a show with him. I guess I don't know, whatever the revitalized show that they're doing. She was an extra, but she was in the room with him. So, and she said he's very scary looking. No, someone said, I thought police cleaned up the blood. No. Okay, so they cleaned up the blood that had pooled under Charles before they brought Alex in, so that it wouldn't be too traumatizing for him. But no, Alex and or Lori cleaned up the entire room. And and again, I covered a lot of these details in the live, the most recent live I did about the investigation into Charles' murder. But the gun Alex used is a very high power gun. So yeah, um, there should have been blood spatter everywhere. And they should have, I mean, if they had both been in a room that was surrounded by windows and or mirrors, wood floor, and no furniture, so there was nothing to absorb the sound, both Lori and Alex should have had significant, if not permanent, hearing loss. So and law enforcement would have known that. Like I took a self-defense course where, I learned to use a gun and stuff, and I knew that from just taking that basic course. You have to have protection, ear protection. So the fact that they were able to hear just fine, you never see either one of them like covering their ears. They weren't, there was no indication that they were struggling with tinnitus, which is what they should have had being in a room with multiple gunshots and, ostensibly no ear protection. There was so clearly either a suppressor and or they both had protection, ear protection. But in either of those scenarios, that would be one more indicator. This wasn't self-defense. They were prepared, and yeah. So uh, okay. Someone said it looked like the gun jammed, and Alex may have cleared that round out the side. He would have collected the round. I think that round was manipulated to try to look like it was the round that hit him. But I do hope that we hear from, I'm pretty sure it was the fire captain who, when I saw that, I just saw Kathy said, Annie, you need a stronger drink than Fresca. Oh man. Um, mm, anyway, so yeah, yeah, I don't think it jammed. I think the entire scene was contrived, and there were red flags all over that scene. Like you can't, like, if you're going to say you were shot in self-defense, then you call 911 immediately. You assist in um in CPR efforts. You don't clean up the blood, like I just I I can't even begin. Like I really try to be fair and try to, anticipate or like, think through reasons why people might be weird and do weird things. But no, there's nothing to explain how they walked out of that house and were like, "Here you go, here's your house back." Yeah. Okay. Sally asked, "Do you think she'll throw Kylie?" I'm sure she meant Kylie under the bus again if given the opportunity, like if she testifies. If she doesn't testify, I I think any attempts to throw Tylee under the bus, even in her questioning, I think that Trina will object vigorously, and yeah, so I don't think it'll get very far at all. Just she was like objecting on relevance and yeah. And even with those objections, like Lori was asking questions, I was just like, I, are you just like coming up with stuff on the fly? Like there was no, like she just kept it almost seemed like she was enjoying the attention and probably thought that she really sounded professional. And at times she did, but like professional, but like dumb, like in terms of like any kind of legal finesse. And it's like, okay, so how many times are you going to ask the same question? Um, but yeah, and like, there was just it's like she was trying to testify without being a witness, like trying to explain away why Alex was so calm or why she was so calm and all this. That yeah. No, Sunny asked, how did they have a party if there was crime scene tape up around the house? They released the house. Yeah, they yeah, and then, if they had any intention of coming back, I think the whole purpose of the pool party was, well, I think it had two purposes. One, to compromise the scene so that if they came back, it's like, wow, at this point, like we've spilled soda. Yeah, so many people have traipsed through the house because who wouldn't want to go to a pool party in a house where a man had just been murdered? Like they would have just been like walking by like a they cut out the baseboard, so there would have been like a hole where the baseboard was, excuse me, and they cut out the floorboard where that had been under Charles, where there was the etched path. So yeah, like it's bizarre, But anyway, but then I think the other thing is I think all of these people who were at the pool party thought that there was going to be a big uh payout. I think they all thought, I think Lori's whole family thought she was going to get $1 million. And I don't think that people distanced themselves from her until she found out she wasn't getting the $1 million. And immediately afterwards, Colby was like, come get your dog. We don't have room for him. And yeah, and so yeah, it's yeah, and the next door neighbor was interviewed and by a YouTuber. I forget his name. I always forget his name. He was really active early on, but uh, but he interviewed her, and it wasn't just like a little pool party. She said there was loud music, and it was quite the event. Um, thank you, Soul Souffle. Uh, yeah, it's growing. My hair is growing out. And then I was up so late last night working on the app that we were planning on leaving at 7:30 this morning, and I woke up at 7:22. That means I turned off multiple alarms and I have no recollection of it. So I just like, threw it up. But thank you. Um, uh, it's just nice to have hair in my face again. Um, okay, I'll take a couple more questions and then I'm gonna call it a night. Um, but I do plan to go live, probably not every day, but just I kind of take notes for the lives, like, oh, okay, that's new information that I didn't know. Um, do you think they'll bring up how long Lori collected Social Security from Charles for JJ, knowing JJ was no longer alive? Probably not. It's not particularly germane to this case. Mm, okay. They will be allowed to bring in some of the crimes that she was convicted of. I thought it was kind of funny. I did, obviously, I don't think the judge was trying to be funny, But when they were kind of bandying about like which convictions the prosecution would be allowed to mention, the judge said that, basically he didn't want to allow anything that made her look deceptive. And he said, like some charges, they actually have deception built into the charge. Like, so he was saying, he wouldn't allow the grand theft by deception charge to be brought in. But it was the most minor charge that she faced. So I don't know how that's going to, play out, but it does seem like he is inclined to say, and it's a little more clear cut than it was when they were in Idaho. Because to be honest, I didn't really see how the juice was worth the squeeze, bringing in the charges that she hadn't faced yet here in Arizona, in Idaho. I understand the grounds for it, but in this case, I do think it is pertinent, but because she just wants to pass this off as, it was just a tragedy. It's just, you know, people die, people commit suicide. You know, anyway, um, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that uh plays out. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce the name. Oopsis. Uh, said, well, canvassing the neighbors may tell, I think she meant law enforcement, how many shots or I guess neighbors, yeah, would canvassing the neighbors may tell someone how many shots they heard. Um, Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't really understand. The punctuation is your friend when you're making comments. But I take the point of like we'll never know if any of the neighbors heard anything. Like if you have neighbors who say, "Oh yeah, I was out taking the trash out and I didn't hear anything at that time." And you have multiple gunshots from a very, very loud gun. Like in 2020, when I did my first live about Charles, I actually looked up the decibel rating for the gun that Alex used, and it was equivalent to a standing next to a jet engine. Like that's how loud this gun is. And then it's magnified by her stupid dance room, like there was nothing to absorb the sound. So if they had canvassed the neighbors and all the neighbors said, no, we didn't hear anything. I left for work at that time, or I was walking my dog, or, just whatever, then obviously that would be highly suspicious that he used a suppressor. And we know that they found a suppressor I believe it was in the garage in Idaho or that closet, one of the two. They found a suppressor. And but anyway, so I mean that wouldn't be able to be that wouldn't be evidence that could be admitted into this trial. I'm just saying that, um yeah, I think there were so many indicators that should have cued law enforcement in that, all was not as they claimed. I mean, even the fact, and I've talked about this before multiple times, but even just the fact that, like, as they mentioned today, Lori had Charles' cell phone, and Detective Inkling asked for the phone when she came back with Alex and Tylee, and 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 they handed over the phone, and Lori said, I found it in his car. Like the fact that Detective Inkling didn't question, well, wait a minute. y- You had told me just a couple hours ago that ostensibly the whole reason Charles was shot was you got into a big fight over this cell phone. So and you wouldn't give it back to him. So the only way that cell phone, since Charles was shot and killed in the house, the only way the cell phone could have made it into the car would have been for one of them to bring it into the car. So even just to say, oh yeah, I found it in the car. I'm just like, how this isn't a case of woulda, coulda, shoulda. This is a case of just like freaking common sense, like, do you did you guys not coordinate? Did you not compare notes after after all of the interviews? How in the world were all of these contradictions and leaps of logic just either dismissed or not picked up on? And one isn't any better than the other. Because it's either way, you circle back to incompetence. But it just so happens in this case, the incompetence it costs other victims their lives. So anyway, okay, enough for one night. Yeah, and I won't be able to like really plan the lives ahead of time. So if you haven't turned, I don't promote the channel. I don't tell people to like or subscribe. I don't care. Subscribe, don't subscribe. But if you want to follow the updates, then you will want to hit the bell to be notified. It's still, like spitting into the wind. You may or may not actually be notified, but you'll at least have a better chance. On that note, have a good night.